I am 31 years old and I can tell you the exact sentence that ended something in me. Not a fight, not a slammed door, not a screaming match in someone's driveway at Thanksgiving. It was 11 words delivered as a text reply at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning while I was packing my son's lunchbox. I had sent something simple, the kind of message you write without overthinking, because you still believe, on some level, that the people who raised you are at least interested in the child you're raising. I typed, Jasper's kindergarten graduation is Thursday at 10. Would mean so much to have family there. That was it. No pressure folded into the words like a hidden invoice. Just a mom who wanted her 5-year-old to look up from that little stage and see his people sitting in the folding chairs. My mother replied at 8:47, we've got plans that day. You know how it goes. My sister added her part 11 minutes later. He's 5. He's not going to remember who came anyway. I read that second one 3 times. I kept waiting for the follow-up, the just kidding, a laughing emoji at minimum. Nothing arrived. So I put my phone face down on the counter, finished packing Jasper's grapes and his dinosaur crackers, zipped his bag, and typed back one word to the group thread. Okay. Not a breakdown, not a paragraph with no punctuation, just the quietest door I have ever closed. Here's what I want you to understand before I tell you the rest. I didn't get to start from zero. When my divorce finalized and I was left with an 18-month-old, a 2-bedroom apartment with a wall unit AC that quit every July, and a front desk job at a dental office that barely covered childcare, I wasn't in a position to say no to anyone. My family knew that. And somehow, I was still the one they leaned on. I paid my mother's property tax when she fell behind. Twice. Not a loan, just a transfer, because making it a loan would have required her to acknowledge it. She cried and called me her rock, and then, that same weekend, ordered a new sectional for her living room off a furniture site she'd seen advertised on television. I co-signed my sister's car loan when her credit was shot from a few years of bad choices. My name is still attached to that thing. I lent her $2,400 for first and last month's rent when she moved into her new place. She swore she'd pay it back by Christmas. That was 2 Christmases ago. Last spring, when her dog needed emergency surgery, I covered the bill because the alternative she presented me with was just putting the dog down. I love that dog. I paid. I want to be careful not to frame this like I was keeping a ledger. I wasn't, not consciously. At the time, I genuinely believed this was what family meant. You stepped in. You didn't make someone feel small for needing a hand. That belief had been stitched into me so early and so thoroughly I'd never once thought to pull at the threads. By the time Jasper's graduation came around, I had finally reached steadier ground. I'd gotten my certification in medical billing and moved into an office job with real benefits, actual paid time off, and a 401(k) I was actually contributing to. I wasn't comfortable exactly, but I wasn't white-knuckling it every time an unexpected bill hit the mailbox. That felt like a miracle after the years I'd had. Rafe had been part of my life for 18 months by then. He wasn't a grand romantic gesture, and I say that with all the warmth I have. He showed up quietly, remembered that Jasper was allergic to tree nuts without being reminded, knew which dinosaur was his favorite and could name it without hesitating. Fixed my kitchen faucet on a Saturday morning without making it an event. He was the first person in a long time who didn't make me feel like I was holding the ceiling up with my bare hands. His ex had opinions about the fact that he'd moved on with someone who came with a kid and a complicated history. She voiced those opinions through the occasional carefully placed remark that found its way back to us, plausible enough to look like nothing if you called her on it. I filed it away. I had real things to focus on. Jasper's kindergarten graduation was the most real thing on my calendar. I'd spent 2 weeks on it. The school ceremony itself was 45 minutes, every kid crossing a little carpeted stage in a paper mortarboard hat to collect a rolled diploma tied with a ribbon. But I'd planned a party afterward at our apartment complex's community room. I strung a banner. I ordered a dinosaur-themed cake from a bakery 3 towns over because I had spent enough time with this child to know exactly which design would make his whole face open up when he saw it. I invited his 2 best friends from class, my coworker and her husband who had become family to us by then, and our upstairs neighbors, a retired couple who had watched Jasper since he was barely walking and who treated his milestones like they were their own. I'd picked up streamers in his favorite shade of green. I'd made a little photo garland of him from the past year, taped it to a string of fairy lights, and practiced how to hang it so it didn't fall down in the first 5 minutes. I had thought my mother and my sister would want to come. Not to the party necessarily, just to the ceremony. To watch this small person they shared blood with walk across a stage in a paper hat and look out at the audience with that expression kids get when they realize they've done something real. I thought they'd want that moment. I already told you what they said instead. The morning of the graduation, I was up before 6. I pressed Jasper's khaki pants, the ones he kept tugging at around the waist. I let him pick his own socks. That's how we ended up with one dinosaur sock and one rocket ship, which he found extremely funny. He was still laughing about it in the school parking lot. The gym smelled like construction paper and hand sanitizer and old carpet. There were so many phones in the air during the procession you could barely see the stage. But when Jasper walked up to the microphone, took his diploma from his teacher, and turned to find me in the crowd, his face did something I don't have the right words for. It broke open. Just pure, undefended happiness. I didn't cry until I got to the car. I didn't want him to see me and think something had gone wrong. Rafe put his arm around my shoulders in the parking lot, said nothing. He has good instincts about when silence is the right response. The party was everything. My upstairs neighbor brought a vegetable tray and stayed 3 hours longer than she'd planned. My coworker's husband spent 20 minutes trying to teach Jasper a card trick. Jasper never got the trick right, but watching him confidently perform the wrong version of it, for everyone repeatedly, was funnier than the trick itself would have been. The dinosaur cake was perfect. Jasper sat at the head of the table in his paper hat and ate 2 slices and announced, formally, that this was the best day of his whole life. Then he asked if the T-Rex on the cake was edible. When I said yes, he ate its head immediately. He didn't ask where his grandmother was. He didn't mention his aunt once. He was entirely, completely, joyfully present in the room that was full of people who had shown up for him. That evening, after he was asleep, I posted a few photos. Him in the parking lot clutching his diploma, the group at the party, cake smeared on faces, good natural light. The last one was just him and me, his head thrown back mid-law, the banner slightly crooked behind us. The caption was simple. He worked so hard for this, so grateful for everyone who showed up to celebrate him. I put my phone face down and went to bed. I knew they'd see it. The next morning arrived quiet. Then a text from a cousin I had maybe seen twice in 5 years. Your mom is really upset. She's saying she didn't even know about the graduation. I sat with that for a moment. Then I typed back as simply as I could manage. I invited her. She said they had plans. I thought that would be the end of it. It was not even close. By mid-afternoon, I'd heard from an aunt, a second cousin who'd somehow gotten my number, and 2 of my mother's friends who were still connected to me on social media from years back. Every message was some version of the same thing. Your mother is heartbroken. She had no idea. You should reach out. I copied and pasted the same reply over and over. I invited her. She said they had planned. Became a kind of shield. Small, plain, true. My sister texted me directly. That post made us look like we weren't invited. You could have scheduled it on a weekend like a normal person. I want to note, the school set the date. I had exactly as much control over it as I had over the weather. I started typing a response, deleted it, started again, deleted that too. I put my phone in my purse and took Jasper to the park instead. My mother texted 2 days later. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the message I'd sent 9 days before the ceremony. Just, I saw the pictures. You really went all out. Must be nice. I set the phone on the counter, walked to the window, looked at the parking lot for about 30 seconds. Walked back, picked up the phone, and put it in a drawer. That night, my sister's husband called. He sounded the way people sound when they've been volunteered for something they didn't agree to. A little rehearsed, a little apologetic before he'd even started. He introduced himself, which was unnecessary since I knew his voice, and then told me they wanted to do something for Jasper, that it wasn't right that the family hadn't been there for the ceremony, that they'd put something together for Saturday. A party room at a pizza place with an indoor playground, the kind with the tubes and the ball pit. My mother would be there, and a few cousins. He said they'd taken care of everything. He said I just had to bring Jasper. Just show up, like I was a missing prop in someone else's production. I stood in my kitchen and understood exactly what was happening. They needed a photograph. One photograph of Jasper with his grandmother, balloons in the background, everyone smiling, something postable. A staged reconstruction of love for an audience of relatives who hadn't been paying close enough attention to notice the timing was suspicious. The invitation I had actually sent and the reply I had actually received would be quietly buried under a new image. Look, we celebrated him. Everything is fine. We're good people. I told him I'd think about it. He sounded relieved. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. On Saturday, I woke Jasper up early. He blinked at me through half-closed eyes. I said, "Pack your bag, we're going to your first real baseball game." He sat straight up. I'd bought the tickets 2 days after the phone call. Upper deck, third base side, not fancy seats but real ones. I packed a small cooler bag, his Orioles cap that was slightly too big and kept falling forward over his eyes, and a little pair of binoculars we'd found at a garage sale that he'd been waiting for a reason to actually use. I don't have the language for what his face looked like when we came through the stadium tunnel and the field opened up in front of us. He stopped walking, he grabbed my hand without looking at me. He just stood there taking it in, the green of the grass almost too vivid to be real, the players warming up below us, the whole enormous bowl of the place. After a long moment, he said very seriously, "Mom, it's so big." We ate hot dogs and peanuts in the shell. He worked the binoculars with the focus of a scientist examining a specimen, tracking the third baseman between every pitch. In the seventh inning, the whole crowd started clapping along to a song, and Jasper stood up on his seat and clapped with them, grinning at strangers who grinned right back at him. Across the city, a party room at a pizza restaurant was filling up with relatives who were waiting for a 5-year-old who wasn't coming. My phone buzzed at 1:15, my sister, unbelievable. 4 minutes later, you humiliated Mom in front of the whole family after everything we put together. I read the messages. I put my phone back in my bag. I watched Jasper track a fly ball all the way to the warning track through his binoculars, gasping when the outfielder caught it, turning to me with his mouth open like he needed to confirm I had seen the same thing. That night, after he was asleep, I posted one photo, just him in the stadium, binoculars around his neck, mouth open mid-shout, the bright green field glowing behind him. The caption was one word, irreplaceable. Rafe looked at the post and put his hand on the back of my neck, gentle. He knew what the quiet was costing me. He also knew it was right. 2 days after the baseball game, I opened my banking app. I'd been sending my mother $200 a month through Venmo for what she called emergencies. The transfer had been running for so long I barely registered it anymore. I scrolled to the recurring payment and canceled it with a single tap. No message, no explanation, just gone. My sister's car insurance. I'd been covering it quietly for 2 years after her rates went up following a fender bender. She had never once asked me if I was still doing it. I had never made it a point of conversation. I went into my account and removed the autopay. I didn't tell either of them. There was no announcement, no ultimatum, no fight. I simply stopped subsidizing the lives of people who had looked at my son's graduation and decided he wouldn't remember who came. The silence that followed had a different texture than before. Not dismissive, not casual, watchful, like something was calculating at a distance. Rafe noticed the shift. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, he said quietly, "They're not going to let it sit." I handed him a bowl to dry. "I know," I said. He folded the towel over the oven handle and said, "Whatever they do next, you don't have to face it the way you used to." He said it like a fact, not a pep talk. I believed him. I also knew my mother and my sister. They had never once, in my entire memory, simply accepted losing control of a story. The call I wasn't expecting came on a Wednesday afternoon from my sister's husband. He didn't sound scripted this time. He sounded exhausted. He said he needed to tell me something, and he didn't know if he should, but he was going to anyway. He'd seen the text thread on my mother's phone. She'd been showing people a screenshot of our conversation, but when he actually read the full exchange, it didn't match what she'd been describing at all. She had been telling everyone I hadn't told her about the graduation until the last minute, but the date on my message was 9 days before the ceremony, and her reply, "We've got plans that day," was right there above my text, in the same thread she'd been using as evidence against me. He said he'd pointed that out to her. She told him I must have sent the message to the wrong number first and resent it late. He said he stopped arguing with her after that. He also said he'd happened to see the Venmo history on my sister's phone. She had told him the two of us had an arrangement we'd both agreed to. He hadn't understood until that moment that the arrangement was entirely one-directional. I didn't say much. I thanked him. He exhaled and said he was sorry for whatever that was worth. Then he said something that landed in a way I wasn't prepared for. "You never owed them this much. You know that, right? You never did." I sat on the edge of my bed after the call ended. That sentence did something quiet and permanent to me. Not because the information was new, because hearing it said out loud by someone who had seen the inside of it made it impossible to argue with anymore. The crisis text arrived on a Sunday afternoon while I was folding laundry. "My sister, Mom's at the hospital, something with her heart. You need to call her." No context, no details, no acknowledgement of anything between us. Just the oldest lever in the collection, the one that had worked on me so reliably for years, because what kind of person doesn't respond to hospital and heart? I set down the shirt I was folding. I thought about it. Then I picked the shirt back up and finished folding it. I didn't call. I didn't reply. A cousin reached out 2 hours later to say it wasn't a cardiac event, that it was elevated blood pressure, that my mother was stable. She mentioned gently that my mother was very emotional and couldn't understand why I hadn't come. I thanked her for the update and said nothing else. The next morning, my sister posted a photo from the hospital room. My mother in bed, looking tired but composed, my sister's arm curved around her in the way people pose when they want to look devoted. The caption read, "Some of us show up, no matter what. That's what real family means." No mention of me. No mention of what had broken. Just a frame placed carefully for people who would only ever see the surface. Rafe saw it on my screen and said without looking up, "Don't. It's exactly what they want." He was right. My mother's message came 5 days after she was discharged, the longest thing she had ever written me. She talked about the hospital stay, about feeling frightened and alone, about missing who we used to be to each other. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. She said she wanted her family back. She did not mention the graduation invitation. She did not say she was sorry. She did not acknowledge the property tax, or the rent, or the co-signing, or the 2 years of car insurance, or any of it, not a single line. The last sentence was, "I just want things to go back to the way they were." I read it once. I set my phone on the counter and made Jasper his after-school snack, listened to him explain a complicated game his friends had invented on the playground, watched him eat. After he went to do his reading homework, I picked up the phone. I typed one sentence. "You had a family. You decided Jasper and I weren't worth showing up for." I hit send. I blocked her number. I blocked my sister. I blocked the cousin who kept arriving in my messages with fresh installments of guilt. I blocked 2 of my mother's friends who had been leaving pointed little comments on my posts for weeks. Rafe was standing in the doorway when I looked up. He walked over and held me for a minute without saying anything. Then he said quietly, "I'm proud of you. Not for the blocking, for not dismantling myself to avoid it." The weeks that followed were genuinely strange because of how undramatic they were. No more texts from extended relatives, no more social media jabs thinly coated in concern, no more phone calls from people who had only ever heard one version of things, just quiet. I had not understood until then how much noise the situation had been generating that I'd simply learned to live inside of. Jasper adjusted the way children do, which is to say he moved forward without looking back. He stopped mentioning his grandmother unprompted, which he hadn't done often, but the fact that the references just quietly ceased told me everything I needed to know about what he'd sensed underneath the surface. He started talking about his turtle obsession more, about a boy at school named Braden who kept stealing his spot in the lunch line, about whether turtles dream. His world was filling in with good things. I watched it happen and felt something loosen in my chest. In the fall, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It turned out to be an old friend of my mother's, a woman I hadn't seen since high school, calling to tell me my mother wasn't doing well emotionally and that she hoped I would find it in my heart to reach out. She said very earnestly that you only get one mother. I listened to the whole thing. I deleted it. I wasn't angry. I was just done. On a Thursday in early spring, I found a plain envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was an index card in shaky, careful handwriting. It was from a woman named Doris, my grandmother's old neighbor, a woman I hadn't thought about in years. The note said, "Your mother mentioned you finally stood up for yourself. Good for you. I always liked your backbone. Don't let them talk you out of it." I had absolutely no idea how she knew. I had no idea how she got my address. I stood at the mailbox and read the card 3 times and laughed in a way I hadn't in months. It's on my refrigerator now, held up with a blue crab magnet. Almost a year has passed since the silence started. The drama dissolved the way bad weather eventually does. The lies ran out of places to go. My mother and sister exist somewhere at the far edge of my awareness, the way a storm system does when it's moving away from you. You know it's there, you just don't feel it anymore. What I feel instead is this apartment. Rafe's coffee cup in my dish rack on mornings he stays over. Jasper's backpack dropped directly in front of the door every single day, without exception, no matter how many times we have talked about it. The library book about painted turtles that he has renewed 3 times because he cannot get enough. The way he sings to himself under his breath when he's playing, not any real song, just sounds he invents, which means he is content. Our people are small in number and enormous in the ways that count. Rafe and his brother, my coworker and her husband, the couple upstairs who considers themselves Jasper's grandparents and would not let you try to argue them out of it. Jasper's birthday is in 6 weeks. I already have the decorations. Last week, he climbed onto the bar stool at the kitchen counter while I was making dinner and watched me for a minute. Then he said, out of nowhere, Mom, when are we going to another baseball game? I looked at him. I said, soon, bug. He slid off the bar stool, satisfied, and went back to his dinosaurs. Didn't ask about anyone who wasn't there. Didn't notice any empty space. Just the field he remembered, green and enormous and full of noise, the binoculars around his neck, the hot dog he ate in 6 bites because he was afraid of missing something. That's the only thing I was ever trying to build for him, a life so full that absence doesn't leave much of a mark. I think we're getting there. I know we are.